This is the Final Round Podcast, coming to you live from the FingerLakes1.com studios in downtown Seneca Falls, New York. And now your host, Chris Marquardt. Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 23, a very special edition of the Final Round Drag Racing Podcast. Excited to have the one and only Joe Pappas along with us from the historic Motown Missile. We're going to be spending the entire hour with him. Jason Oldfield also finding time out of his busy schedule to come and hang out with us for a little while, helping put everything together. I appreciate you putting this interview on the table for us.
Well, we tried to do it before, but Joe's a busy guy, so we couldn't, unfortunately, get him earlier. But, yeah, thankfully it worked out this time, and he's got, I have to say, a lot of interesting stories to tell, so I think it'll be a really interesting show for the viewers.
I can only imagine. Coming to us from just outside of Detroit. Joe, man, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jason, how are you today?
I'm well, Joe. Yourself?
I'm great.
Good, good. Actually, when I
had lunch with your Uncle Dick today, and that's Dick Oldfield for those of you that don't know. Dick and I try to get together every couple of weeks for lunch and catch up on stuff, and it was good to see him today. He was doing well.
That's good to hear. You see him more often than I do, so I'm glad to hear he's doing okay.
Yep, he was doing good today. So good day.
Good, good. Yeah, and for those that don't know, my Uncle Dick was the original driver of the Motown Missile Pro Stock car, and then once Don Carlton took over the driving duties, he stayed on as a crew guy with the rest of the Missile team. And Joe, when did you join the Missile team? I know you weren't with them from the start.
No, I joined the team at the beginning of the 73 season, at the end of 1972, actually. Up to that time, I had worked for Mike Fonz and the Rod Shop. Mike, as most people know, had raced the Rod Shop Dodge Challenger and then later a Demon in Pro Stock. And I helped him build that car in a two-car garage in Southfield, Michigan. And then later he ran the car, and I joined him in late 70, and we won the World Championship at Amarillo, Texas with that car in 71. And it was a pretty fun car. It was a clone, literally down to the last nut, bolt, screw, and washer to the Dodge Challenger Missile Motown Missile car that your uncle drove, and I happen to have that car in my shop out here behind the house.
The Fonz's car?
No, the Missile.
Oh, the Missile. Yeah, that I knew. Yeah, I knew you had that car there.
Fonz's car was destroyed in a fire at some point.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't realize. I knew that it was painted very similarly to to the Motown Missile, but I guess I didn't realize that Fonz's car was a complete replica.
Yeah, literally down to the last nut and bolt. What Fonz would do is go over to Ted Spihar's shop in the morning, take dimensions and notes, come back, and then we'd work all day and fabricate up what he learned off the car and the dimensions, how to place the K member, because nobody built those cars like they came out of the factory. They were tweaked quite a bit.
Right.
And the wheels were moved here and there, and how to build the cage and how to reinforce this or that. And we even dug a pit in the backyard and acid-dipped parts in the backyard of his house.
I would say, obviously, hopefully the DEC isn't listening.
Yeah, that's long gone. I'm not giving anybody the address, but I do know it.
Well, yeah, like I said, that's interesting. I have to say, honestly, I didn't know that. So did Fonz build his own power plants for those cars, or were those weren't supplied by Ted, were they?
No, they weren't. Dave Koffel was in charge of the Rod Shop group. So he was good friends with Gary Ostrich in Nevada, Iowa. And most of our engines for that car came from Gary Ostrich. And there's a wonderful story to be told about the week preceding the World Finals in 1971. Fonz went to a test at Milan with the car. I believe it was on a Monday morning. And for some reason, I wasn't there. I was back at the shop, which was his garage, getting ready to go to Amarillo. And inadvertently, Mike forgot to hook up the wheelie bars and literally stood the car on the rear bumper.
Yeah.
It came crashing down, broke the steering, both front wheels got splayed out, broke the oil pan, broke the crankshaft, and he brings home this severely wounded car late in the afternoon. Kofel called Gary Ostrich, and Gary hopped in his car from Iowa, drove all night, brought a crankshaft, rods, pistons, literally built a new engine in the driveway of Fonz's house.
Wow.
Mike and I fixed the car, repaired everything, and we went to Amarillo and won the doggone race.
Wow. Now, where was Fonz out of?
He lived in Southfield, Michigan at the time, and literally right after that, we within a few months, we moved to a shop, a real shop in Troy, Michigan. Just in Troy. Not far again from Teddy's shop, probably 4 miles from Ted's.
Okay.
And we raced that car from that particular place at that point.
Now,
but Fonz was a local guy. I knew Mike from the time I was about 13 years old. He was married to my best friend's sister.
Oh, no kidding.
Mike was our chauffeur when Dave and I couldn't drive yet, so that's how I met Mike many, many years ago.
That's now, was he, how much was, I'm assuming he was, well, yeah, you said, he was your chauffeur before you could drive, so obviously he was older than you. How much older than you was he?
Yeah, well, I just talked to Mike, and I think he said he's 74.
Okay.
I'm 69, so there's not that much difference in age between us.
Yeah.
But, when you're 15 or 16 and don't have a car
right.
or a driver's license, you need some adult, and for whatever reason, Mike was that guy to drive Dave and I around and drop us off and pick us up, and it was a great life.
That's it. Like I said, I didn't. I guess I didn't. I've never really talked to you honestly much about the background with Fonz. It's pretty interesting. Yeah, I say Chris actually has a picture of the '70 Challenger up on the screen right now. I think
with
my uncle's name, with Barney Oldfield on the roof, right? And I think that picture might be. I wanted to say it was from Pomona, but I'm not 100% certain of that. Sitting in the staging lanes, but yeah, I guess I really didn't. Like I said, I don't know that I've really talked to you much about the history with Mike Fonz. Now, I'm assuming he was like most kids in that era, just into cars and started off racing his street car, and then got more serious as time went on.
He did. I know that he used to race Chevrolets a lot, and he had an old Biscayne that had a 409 in it. That he would actually NHRA race, but he bought a 1957 Corvette with a big block 427 in it from a guy named Dave Bieneman. And Dave lived in Royal Oak as well, and he ended up racing in Top Fuel, and now his son owns a company, I believe, called MBE, Matt Bieneman Engineering.
Okay.
2 cylinders, heads, and stuff. It's down in North Carolina. But Dave's still around, but he bought this street race car from Bieneman, and It was featured on a TV program back in the the late '60s, known as First Tuesday. And if you know anything about television, that show was the precursor for 60 Minutes that we still have on today.
Really?
Yep, and they did a feature on street racing and drag racing. And they had cameras inside. They had a cameraman in the car with Fonz while they were street racing on Woodward Avenue.
No kidding.
Well, that was phenomenal. I still have a copy of that somewhere. Mike just progressed from street racing to running Camaros in modified production. And when Pro Stock came along in 1970, he raced a Camaro in Pro Stock, and it was mildly successful. He won I think the only race that he won was at the popular hot rodding event at US 131. And he then got to deal with the rod shop to build a car and proceeded to do so. And I did construction work and went to college at the time, so I worked for Mike in the wintertime, and we built that car over a winter and got it ready, and then later that year I went to work for him full-time.
So that was a winter of 70 to 71 that you built that car?
Yeah, it was.
So how long did that partnership last? I mean, Chris, actually, you had a picture up a few minutes ago of a Motown Missile that Fonz had that was really I don't know if you guys ran Dodges or if you ran the Plymouth, so I don't know if it was a Demon or a Duster, but it said Motown Missile, and I know for quite a while Fonz had Motown Missile, I guess, named cars, if you will. I mean, how long did that partnership last?
Well, it really wasn't a partnership. As you may recall, at the end of 1972, the Motown Missile was a Barracuda.
Right.
And it was followed by the Duster.
Yep.
That most people are familiar with.
Right.
Known as the Motown Missile.
Right.
But at the end of 72, Ted Spehar sold that car. Really early in 73, he sold it to Fonz, the Barracuda. And Fonz bought the name. And I say that, that was kind of the deal at the time. Fonz got the car and the name.
Sure.
We changed the name of the car, the missile car, to the test cars, to Mopar Missile at the start of the 73 season.
Right.
So it was okay for Fonz to run that car as the Motown Missile. Then he ran that car for about a year, and then he purchased the Demon that was a Dick Landy, Kent Fuller built car for Irv Baringhouse.
Right.
And that's the car that people see as the Demon, or the Duster, I guess, painted up as the Motown Missile.
Right, yep.
With that paint scheme. And Irv had passed away. He had switched to Ford and had lost his life in a race. Don't know where, but I think somewhere in the Midwest. And his widow Nancy sold the car to Mike. And Mike, at that point, sold the Barracuda to the guys from Canada. I think it ended up in the hands of Beatty and Woods.
Right, yep.
And Mike raced that car for, probably another year or so. And then he bowed out of racing, concentrating on building cars. And that lasted a few more years, and then he went back to the old family business, which was construction.
Oh, no kidding.
And believe it or not, he's still working.
Wow. Good for him.
Yeah. So he's got to be in good shape.
Yeah, no doubt. I guess, I mean, geez, there's a whole bunch of things that you mentioned there. So the Irv Beringhouse car, I mean, that car, I don't remember if you were with us. I remember me and my uncle made a road trip out to Ohio to go see that car, where they thought it was one of the, let's call it the Ted Spihar missiles, but it wasn't.
Yeah, that was, all three of us were there.
You were there too. Okay, I couldn't remember if you were there as well.
And actually, the guy, and I feel bad because I always forget his name. He lives in Minneapolis. He called me, asking me about. They thought that was Don's car,
right?
And I was kind of hesitant because my understanding at the time was that Don's car was in the Garlitz Museum.
Right. Yep.
Our 73 car.
Right.
And but we agreed to go look at it, and I asked if Dick could come, and he called you.
Yep.
So there were four of us, if you recall now.
Yep.
We went to that garage and looked at the car, and your uncle and I just shook our heads and told the guy, "Nope, this isn't the right car."
Right.
And don't know why you're calling it the Motown Missile.
Right.
Did it have Motown Missile on it at the time? I don't even remember.
Yeah, I don't either.
It was when I got home that I realized that it dawned on me that was the Fonz car, and I called the guy that we went there for to tell him that, and he really wasn't interested in buying that car. He wanted one of our real test car, race cars.
Yeah, yeah.
So not a, so to speak, a clone or a tribute car, because that's really all that would have been.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember that guy's name. I should remember.
It later got sold, and now I know the fellow that owns the car, and he's a real nice guy, and he lives down in Georgia.
I would say, who owns it now? Because the last I knew, that car, the guy who originally purchased it passed away unexpectedly, and then it was out at Fred Restagno's shop, I guess, and kind of tied up in probate and stuff like that, and that was the last I knew.
Yeah, about, I'm guessing, a little over a year ago.
Yeah.
Maybe, actually, it was 2 years ago now. It was sold in a auction.
Okay.
I don't know if it was a court-ordered auction, and the gentleman who owns it, and just because I don't know that too many people know who he is, I'll just keep his name to myself.
Sure.
He and I talk and correspond, and he bought the car, and the only time it's been out, to my knowledge, since he bought it, is a year ago. They had the Don Carlton Memorial Race at Wilkesboro,
right,
in North Carolina, and it was there. It was not there this year when I went, but he had two other old pro stock clone cars that he's got going in Nostalgia Pro Stock.
Yep.
And so we had a nice talk about what happened and about that particular car and so on and so forth. So he still got it, and it's kind of added to his collection of cars. So
yeah. Now I guess
that's a good thing. It's being preserved at least.
How many of the original cars are still around at this point? Do you know?
The missile cars?
Yeah.
All of them.
Missile cars.
They're still around? All of them?
We know where 5 of them are. Most people didn't know there were actually 6 missile cars, 3 of which people were aware of. And, Jason, you know about all 6.
Right.
But most people don't. So I guess I could talk about that for a second.
Yeah, please do.
Go ahead.
Challenger that your Uncle Dick drove in 1970, and then it was converted to a 71 car, and Don Carlton became the driver at that point. Switched it to a 4-speed, which Carlton was very comfortable with and very good with. And then there was the Barracuda in 1972, which most people remember from its cover on in Big Story and Hot Rod magazine. Very, very nicely done car.
We had a picture up of that a little bit ago.
I think probably the the best looking of all the Missile cars, just because it was so pretty with the gold leaf and all the black paint. Gorgeous car.
I say I'm partial to the 70 car. I like the silver leaf, but it also has my family name on it, so that might be why I might be biased.
We were just talking about that today, and when the car got restored, it got restored as a 71.
Right.
And we kind of said, it should have been done as the 70. We like that paint scheme with when it said Fernwood Dodge on the side, and your uncle's name on the roof and on the window, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, I have to say, even if my uncle's name wasn't on the roof, I still like that paint scheme better, the 70, a lot better actually than the 71.
Now this should be the 70 here as soon as this.
So I would say Chris is loading up pictures. So we just showed the 72 car, the CUDA, the cover of the Hot Rod magazine. Chris had that up, and so now he's loading up. He thinks is the 70 car. That was a picture that you showed before in the staging lanes, Chris. With my uncle's.
It just won't come up.
For some reason it won't load at the moment. But anyways, so I like that. I like that paint scheme a lot better than the 71 livery, regardless of whether my uncle's name was on the roof or not.
Yeah, I think the reason they kind of painted the car in 71 the way they did, they got what people always thought was a big deal sponsorship from Jegs. And really, Ted told me the other day, says, Joe, that was so little money, you would barely buy people dinner nowadays. So, it wasn't very much money involved at all. But, after the 72 car was built, and the rules kept evolving, as most people know, the chassis became a lot more sophisticated, and the thing with Jenkins showing up in Pomona with a tube chassis car in 72, even though everyone was told not to do it, well, they let them do it. And so we built the 73 car, which was the Duster.
Right.
And the name changed to Mopar Missile.
Right.
A Motown Missile. And the name change people always ask about. The real fact is that Mopar Parts, through Direct Connection, was our sponsor. And that's where the money came out of the race budget at Chrysler. But technically, it made more sense to call the car the Mopar Missile.
Right.
And quite honestly, there was some legal hassles going on between Motown Records, Barry Gordy, and Ted Spehar over the use of the name Motown. Even though Detroit has been known as the Motown since the early 1900s, Barry Gordy felt that it was his name, and he threatened lawsuits, but instead of going that direction, it's easier just to change the name and, get on with life.
Right.
And quite honestly, the other thing that happened is up to that point, Teddy owned the complete test program. He built the motors. His guys ran the tests for Chrysler. But in 1973, Don Carlton was to run the car. So your Uncle Dick and myself and Don ran the car, did all the test work. Teddy's shop only built the motors for us, and that was the new arrangement. So to separate the name, the two names, Teddy owned the name Motown Missile, and basically Chrysler to this day owns the name Mopar Missile because of the name Mopar in it. So we became a separate entity. SPR supplied the motors. We did all the test work and all the car builds from that point onward. And the 73 car was extra special, as you know, because it was the most successful competition-wise of all the missiles.
Right.
It won the IHRA Pro Stock Championship. It won 5 out of 7 IHRA races and was runner-up at the other 2. and it won only one NHRA race and was runner-up at one. We were runner-up at Pomona, and we were the winner at the Spring Nationals in Columbus.
Yep.
But we only, I think, did 4 NHRA races that year. As you know, the rules were getting really stacked against running Hemis, so it became more and more difficult for us to compete on an even playing field with the small block cars and
Right.
the short wheelbase little cars like the Vegas and the Pintos.
Right.
So we thought, okay, we'll build a short wheelbase car, and we built a Dodge Colt. And we got the Colt built. Dan Knapp built the chassis down in Wyandotte. That's where his shop was. And your uncle and I had the car back up at our shop in Troy. And I took the car out to Butler's in California to have all the tin work done. And when I went back to pick it up after the fall race at Bristol, they told us that NHRA had come down with an edict that they weren't going to let us run a Hemi-powered Dodge Colt in Pro Stock. So we shelved the car. We literally took it down to the Direct Connection warehouse, picked it up with a forklift, and put it up about 3 racks up, next to the ceiling, and that's where it sat until the end of 1974, and that's when it went to North Carolina.
Yep.
But so we came back, and a new plan came out for the 1974, which was to concentrate on building an A-engined Pro Stock car, take advantage of all the rules for the A-engine cars. So your uncle and I took and one of Donnie's match race cars that he had,
The quote-unquote yellow car.
We completely stripped out the cage. We literally stripped it down to just a shell and built a new chassis and tried to incorporate some of the things we thought we might want to do on a real lightweight car. And we built that car in about 90 days because by the time end of January rolled around, into February, we did not go out west to test, but we headed to Florida sometime in February and spent a good, 6 weeks down there testing the A engine in this car that was Missile really number 5, with the Colt being number 4.
Yep.
That no one ever saw. And this A-engine car was painted all yellow, and so we always just referred to it as the yellow test car. And that's the car that developed the A-engine for Pro Stock racing. And that car was extremely fast and very competitive for the rules that were standing at the time. It was an 8-second car easily. I would say it probably was in the 880s, 890s most of the time, and that was competitive with what was running in Pro Stock.
Right.
So that's what started the path to build the wire car. And Mr. Hoover gave Al Adam, our chassis engineer, the task of building a lightweight Pro Stock car that we could campaign in 1975. And that was to be our next Missile car. So that car, the chassis got fabricated at Knapp's, but your uncle and I believe, hung the body and did all the tin work. And this car was unique in the fact that it was probably the first Pro Stock car literally designed on a computer. It was done at Chrysler. It was done the old style way, where back in those days, if you're anybody who remembers computers from the early 70s, everything was batch feed. You did those IBM Aperture cards. You built your program.
Right.
And you utilized whatever software was available. Well, you build a stick model, you assign properties to the sticks, and you maximize the torsional rigidity of the vehicle, because that's what a drag car needs.
Yep.
There's a lot of torsional rigidity. And the one thing we did do that probably shouldn't have done is we didn't even refer to the rule book. Because the rule book's just an encumbrance. It's not a help. Where it said you'd have to have 083 tubing, we'd have 065 or something like that.
Right.
Those tubing sizes were optimized for strength, not for the rule book rules.
Sure.
And the task was to build a 2,000-pound ready-to-race race car. Well, I just told this to Al Adam a couple of weeks ago when I saw him. I said, Al, you screwed up, because the car only weighs 1,850 pounds with a full tank of fuel. He undershot his goal, or he overshot it, I guess. But the car is very unique, chrome moly chassis. It utilized 3 plates. One, the front motor plate not only held the motor in place in the chassis, it tied the chassis together. It was the mounting point for the front suspension. The lower control arms mounted to the motor plate, not to the chassis. So when you take the motor out, you take the whole front suspension off the car. Then there was a mid plate, which was getting to be very typical. And then there was a third plate back at the rear of the Lenco to tie it to the chassis. And the chassis without the motor in place was a limp noodle. The chassis in place, it was extremely rigid. And I think Arnie Clan, the current owner of the car, had it analyzed, and it's as stiff as a typical current Pro Stock car would be.
Wow.
Which just says a lot.
Sure.
That car was, like I said, it was a little bit in the gray area of a lot of things. The interior and all the tin work in the car was magnesium, because it was allowed at the time.
Right.
Well, let's put it this way: there wasn't a rule that said we couldn't.
Sure.
And all the titanium in the car was used in all the suspension pieces were titanium. All the nuts and bolts were titanium. The drive shaft was titanium. The axle tubes, which were we had a mag center section and titanium tubes. All the four-link was titanium. We used a full floater rear end in the car and a spool. The chassis ended at the rear axle, just at the shock mounts above the axle. And the way that you hold the whole back of the car up, including the battery and the fuel cell, was we had stressed wires running from the top of the roll cage, crisscrossing above the rear axle, and welded to a tube that held up the rear of the body.
Cables.
And that's how the car became known as the wire car.
I got to show you some pictures later.
It's out in my shop as well.
Oh,
and it's a very unique piece. It is a difficult car to work on, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
It's extremely, I guess it has a cool factor that's way out there. It's a pretty neat car.
Oh, it definitely has a cool factor. I mean, that car honestly has been legendary for many years. I mean, even before I don't know where or how, I guess. I probably have heard the story, but I can't remember where or how Arnie Clan found that car. But, I mean, it was kind of this almost mythical car, right? It's like, oh, yeah, Chrysler at one point in time, the Missile guys had this thing called the wire car, and it was, literally like a tale that a knight would tell about, dragons they slayed. And it's like, oh, there's no such car as that. It never existed. And then I don't know when it really showed back up again. I mean, obviously people that were involved with the program knew that car existed at one point in time, and I'm not really sure when it kind of resurfaced. But, yeah, it's like now everyone sees it and says, holy cow, that car really does exist. It's and I have to say, I mean, I'm not even sure, honestly, Joe, that up until recently that I had ever seen pictures of that car. I don't remember if I had or not. I mean, my uncle obviously had plenty of pictures of it, but I may have seen him when I was little, but just don't remember. But yeah, it's pretty unbelievable to see firsthand when you see what was done on this car.
Well, yeah, it is.
Well, yeah.
The car was actually bracket raced in North Carolina. Don took the car to I delivered it there in the end of '74 when the program folded. We never got a chance to run the car as a Pro Stock car because Chrysler pulled the plug on running Pro Stock at all in 1975. Or literally said, well, we're not going to do the missile program per se any longer. They continued to test, and there were a number of people that did test work, including Don Carlton, but there was no missile program beyond that point.
Right.
The car ended up in North Carolina with Don. He painted the car. When I delivered it down there, it was plumbed, wired, and was literally a running car with the interior of the car painted and the underside of the car painted. It was just waiting for a color coat. And he sold the car to a lady named Betty Sigmund, and Betty drove the car as a bracket car with a small block Mopar in it. And unfortunately had an incident where she tore off. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but she crashed the car and tore the left front corner of the car off, which was a severe shunt, I must say. And I believe Clyde, who worked for Don at the time, fixed the car. And it was, I believe Betty sold it to someone else. The car passed through, I think, 2 or 3 hands, and then ended up in the hands of Jeff Johnson. And those of you who are Mopar people know who Jeff Johnson is. He was doing Nostalgia Pro Stock Racing and holds those Mopar Expo shows predominantly in the Ohio area. And he's a great guy. And he owned the car, and Arnie saw that it was for sale and purchased the car, and it sat in one of in a warehouse that Arnie had rented for quite a while before Arnie endeavored to do the restoration.
Mm-hmm.
And the car was pretty beat up. It definitely needed a lot of TLC, but the chassis was in decent shape. Some of the sheet metal had to be replaced, but overall the car was in remarkably good shape, and it's a running entity. Just at the end of August, we had it at the Mopar Nationals, and I took it for its longest ride in probably 25 years when I drove it down the track just to get for a photo op thing for people. And it ran like a top. So
now, how much of the original titanium and magnesium was still in it?
A lot of it had been cannibalized over the years.
Yeah.
I think by the time Betty got the car, Don had kept the entire third member, and fabricated a new one using steel.
Okay, so he wasn't stupid. He realized that was worth a lot of money.
That rear end ended up in one of his Colts, I believe.
Okay.
Probably one of the ride shop cars.
Yeah.
And but some of the titanium is still there, and some of it isn't.
Yeah.
But the car still scales in at 1,850 pounds. So that isn't all that bad.
Oh, no, that's extremely light. Is there any, I guess, record? Was there any record kept as far as what the budget was when that car was built? I mean, quite frankly, by the time Betty got it, I mean, that had to be the world's most expensive bracket car.
Yeah. Well, I think there is, but I don't know that anyone wants to really talk about the budget. If you really add up the total effort that went into making that car a reality, I think the number is very close to $250,000.
In 1974 money.
In 1974 dollars.
Right.
Which would be an astronomical amount of money today. I can't imagine the titanium bill on that car. I have lots of pictures of all the titanium parts, and they all existed because I touched them and I built the rear ends and bolted them on the car, so I know that they were there. So
wow,
it was a very, very expensive engineering exercise, I must say. So, but that car is a neat car, and it's here. And Jason, the next time you come to Detroit, you better be over here.
Well, I got to see the new house, so I'll certainly stop by and do that if nothing else. But yeah, I want to see the shop, and I've obviously seen the wire car. I mean, we had it at it was down in Henderson, right? Yeah, a few years ago when the Missile crew was inducted, it was down at Henderson for the Drag Times Hall of Fame induction ceremonies.
And we had it at Carlisle in 2016 when we were all inducted into the Mopar Hall of Fame.
Right.
And the car's been to the Nats, the Mopar Nats, for 3 years in a row now, I think, maybe 4. I brought it back to Michigan in, for 3 years. It's been back in here for 3 years. And then the Challenger's been back here for a little over a year and a half. So, it gets shown. I just showed it a week ago at a car show, a small show in Grosse Pointe. And its next outing will be at the MCAN show in Chicago the weekend before Thanksgiving.
Oh, no kidding.
It was invited to be shown there, so my wife and I will haul it over there and set it up, and Arnie will come in from California, and we'll, it's a Friday, Saturday, it's a Saturday-Sunday show is what it is, just 2 days, but we have to load in on Thursday, and so it's a nice long time to spend in Chicago.
Sure. Yeah, that's cool. Now, one thing, I guess, if I have the story correctly, when you got hooked up, you went from Fonz to the Missile team. That was the way the story was told to me, and I'll let you verify this, that Chris hasn't heard this story, and I'm sure most of our viewers haven't either, but you were supposed to get married.
I've heard some good stories, but I haven't heard this one.
And instead of getting married, my uncle, and I don't know if there was probably somebody else involved, and I'm sure there was probably a few alcoholic beverages involved as well, essentially convinced you, don't get married, you need to quit being with Fonz and come on the road with us, and you said, that sounds like a great idea.
Well, that's partly true. It just so happened that I was supposed to be married in February of that year, of 73. And I was going to miss a chunk of the California trip to go to the Winter Nationals. We ended up being out there for almost 2 months, because there was 2 rainouts for the Winter Nationals that year.
Okay.
And then we usually did a 2 or 3 week test prior to the race, but we ended up, having 5 weeks of testing, and then the week for the race and travel time. So we were gone almost 2 months. But what happened is, luckily, the wedding got called off. Now, your uncle took great pleasure in that whole scenario. But the wedding got called off, and so I was free to go. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's fine by me. And away your uncle and I went. And the way we got there is a story in and of itself. We didn't have a transporter. So we had to borrow one from Sox and Martin. And you know what, everyone knows what the Sox and Martin haulers look like. So
immaculate.
We get this thing from Sox, and it's the old diesel that he had. And it was in fair shape, but the transmission stunk. It was an old Road Ranger transmission, and if you didn't hit every gear properly, you may as well stop and start over again. I mean, literally come to a dead stop. But at any rate, it had no sleeper. So your uncle and I decide, well, okay, we're going to go, and the way we did it is we never stopped, except for food.
Right.
And so we did that. We drove to Albuquerque from Michigan in 30 hours.
Oh, my God.
A little bit crazy. And we decided we wanted to take the tram up Scandia Peak, because that's what you do when you get to Albuquerque. So we pull in there and take the tram up to the top of the mountain, and we take pictures like 2 young guys would do, and had a great time. We're both punch drunk, tired, because no sleeper, and the driver had an air ride seat, but the passenger didn't. And we had, it was a tight fit in that cab. So we went to get fuel, and got basically accosted by the guy at the truck stop and said, "Where's your diesel fuel permit?" And being 2 smart kids, we said, "We don't need a diesel fuel permit." And he said, "Oh, yes, you do in New Mexico." And, we just, we gave him a hard time. So he called the police. So this deputy shows up with the big brimmed hat. He had 2 pearl-handled revolvers. And he comes up with his sunglasses on, and he says, "First thing, I want to see your logbooks." And your uncle and I looked at each other and said, "We don't have any logbooks."
What's a logbook?
Why would we have a logbook? And they said, "Okay, where are your flares?" No idea. And on and on and on. He wrote a list of probably 30 violations, including a 30-hour trip from Detroit without stop.
Right.
And he said, "Okay, you have a choice. You pay this man $10 for the permit, get your fuel, and I'm going to escort you to a hotel. Or you go to jail." And I impound the truck. And quick thinking that we opted to go pay the man $10 and go to the hotel, which we did. And he waited outside while we went into the office and were registering. But instead of registering, we had just asked the guy if we could stand there and talk to him for a few minutes. And then, as it looked like we were getting our key, the officer left. And then we just sat there for another 30 minutes and hopped back in the truck. Decided to go to the Grand Canyon. So we go to the Grand Canyon, but on the way to the Grand Canyon, we ran out of fuel. You don't want to do that in a diesel. So
Yeah.
3 o'clock in the morning, and back in those days, I think you're on Interstate 40. I can't remember what goes through Flagstaff. But I do remember that the tanks were empty, and we were literally coughing and sputtering. And it's 3 in the morning. I pulled up into this little burg. It had a general store that was open, no gas stations. And I go inside and say, "Where can I get diesel fuel?" And he points in both directions and said 50 miles each direction.
Oh, God.
And I said, "Well, I'm literally out of fuel. I'm just it's coughing and sputtering out here." And he said, "Well, listen, you got any empty cans?" Of course, I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Take a jerry can or two and go down and see this Indian." He said he's about a quarter mile down the road. He's got this old car out by the road. Just follow the trail back into the woods and knock on his door. And it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and I don't have a flashlight. I said, "Okay, I'm going to do this." And I did it. And I knock on this guy's door in the middle of the night with these 2 jerry cans and say, "Can I get some kerosene?" And he filled those 2 things up with kerosene. And try carrying 10 gallons of gas in old jerry cans for about, it was probably half a mile back to the truck. And filled the truck up and made it to the next town and got her filled up. So.
Good God.
I would say you guys, and that was with Sox's truck. I've certainly heard plenty of stories about the truck that you guys had that used to change pistons in on the side of the road because it was burning pistons constantly. So, but you guys were old pros at that by that point in time.
I was pretty good at that point. That was back when I worked for Fonz. Our early rod shop trucks were always overweight and underpowered, and we were constantly burning pistons, and we also broke rear hubs on them. So, as you know, you always carry your spare race car motors and parts and bearings and whatever you need, but we also carried wheel hubs and bearings and pistons and rods for the truck motor. And I can't tell you how many times I had to stop at the side of the road in a snowstorm and take the cylinder heads off and the oil pan and pull a rod and a piston out and replace it. You hone it with a piece of sandpaper, and they'll run, until you get to some place where you can actually, hone it properly. But you got to get going. So
right.
What you do.
Now we haven't touched. There's a whole bunch of things we haven't touched on. We've already been talking for 53 minutes here, for an hour show, right? I guess. To just continue the Joe Pappas history, I guess. So when the missile program was canceled, at that point in time, were you essentially fired, or is that when you went to work for Donnie directly?
No. When the missile program was canceled, I was already working for Don.
Okay.
He wanted me to come to North Carolina, and I was getting a lot of. I had a desire to finish my degree, so I really wanted to go back and pick up my last 2 years.
Yep.
For my degree, and I did. Donnie was kind enough to lay me off, and I got unemployment for 2 years while I went to college. So that was a good deal.
Right, sure.
And I finished up in, I finished up in about 15 months instead of 2 years. I took a heavy load and finished, and essentially I thought I was going to get out of cars for a while, and I went to California, but I ended up coming back and going to grad school in Detroit, and ended up retiring from Johnson Controls as an engineering manager in 2013. So yep. I guess it wasn't such a bad life after all.
No, I tell people overall, it's, certainly not that not that it was all glamour, obviously, but, when you look back at my uncle's career, really where he ended up, for the most part, he had drag racing to thank for it. He made connections at the automotive companies basically because he was involved in drag racing. And I think back, essentially in the mid-'60s when he was working at Jansen at the time, and Jim Janis Sr. basically told my uncle, look, you need to decide whether or not you want to be a drag racer or you want to work. And he said, I want to be a drag racer, and I quit. And, it's like, man, that takes a lot of guts. But overall, it worked out pretty well for him. It's like I said, his entire career, essentially, he had drag racing to thank for it. It's pretty incredible from that standpoint.
I always tell the guys like Al Adam and Tom Coddington and all our bosses that are left. I say, it was because of you that I went back to school.
Uh-huh.
I said I could have continued on being just doing what I was doing, building cars and racing and so on and so forth. But I looked at them while we were doing the program and said, I want to be like them.
Right.
And they became really an inspiration. When you have people like Tom Hoover and Tom Coddington as your role models, you really couldn't ask for anything better. So they were my inspiration to go back and become what I became.
Right.
And I owe them, and I owe drag racing for that. And of course, it doesn't hurt that people knew me around town, and I got jobs that put me in nice positions. So that always helps too. Sometimes it just helps to be in the right place at the right time and have the right people know who you are, and good things happen. So.
Now, so you weren't working. So by the time Don was racing the Colt and modified, you weren't working for Don anymore at that point?
No, that was my year and a half that I got away from automotive stuff.
Yep.
And I was living in the hills above Berkeley, California. I was working in a food related business. We sold equipment and did that kind of work. And it was some people I knew from Michigan that were doing that. And I liked California, but it's a different world. And I wanted to get back to Michigan. And so I left, and I came back to Michigan and, did a year of grad school, but I was so busy working that I just had to, I had to concentrate on, making a living. So I just continued on with that, and eventually got married to the young lady that you know. Lynn.
Right.
And everything else is history.
I say it's been, again, there's just so many things to touch on. I mentioned to Chris earlier,
don't get anything too awful deep, because what we'll do is we'll do a soft ending in about 4 minutes,
and then we'll continue.
We'll cap it, and what we'll do is we'll take just a brief interlude. We'll end that recording. We'll start another one so that we can get the backup. So this front half will go on the local cable access.
Sure.
And then we'll continue it and just drive everybody to the Facebook page to see the second half of it.
Yep. Well, that's up to you and how much time Mr. Pappas has to continue to speak with us, because
I don't know what you signed him up for, but but we used up.
Well, I signed him up for an hour, but Joe. I guarantee that we could sit down and talk with Joe, I don't know, would you say a whole day? Would you say 24 hours straight, Joe, I'm guessing, probably at least?
At least the amount of time it takes to get from Michigan to Albuquerque.
Yeah.
Those would just be the stories about your uncle.
There's plenty of those, I know. There's a few of those for sure, but there's
one of the questions that came off right off the bat to me when you were talking about the 73 car, it looked like there was two paint schemes on it. One of it looked like it had a flatter gold tone to it, and then a brighter yellow stripe on the back with red trim accents. Was that in fact the same car from the same year? Did that change paint schemes through the course of one of the seasons?
Because when Butler built that chassis, the car there was no 73 parts available.
Mm-hmm.
So in the earliest pictures, you'll notice that it's a 72 Duster,
Mm-hmm.
and it has the gold tone to it
Right.
on the side. But when we came back from Pomona, we changed the car. Oh, actually, when we came back from Gainesville, we changed the car to a 73. And then we changed the gold didn't pop as well, so we went with the yellow on the side.
My favorite color scheme on that car.
That's a paint scheme that most people are familiar with.
I did not know that. I just learned something. I was shaking my head no as Chris was asking that question. I'm like, no. It was that's just two different cars, and I thought the one was the Fonz car or the Irv Maringhouse car, and I thought the other one was the actual Missile. So I did not know that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the one with the kind of the same scheme, but the colors were a little different on the side of the car.
Huh.
And Ben Donhoff, the guy who owns that car now, has that paint scheme on it, the early paint scheme.
Is that Ben Donhoff car the Mako Missile?
No.
No, that's a different car.
It's the Motown Missile.
Oh, it still says
or the
Motown.
Mopar
The
Missile.
Mopar Missile, right.
It's our 73 car. It's Ben lives in Melbourne, Florida, and that's the car that was in the Garlitz Museum for I think 17 years. And but they've taken it out and they brought it to a number of the shows that we've been at. And they actually made 3 passes on that car at the Mopar Nats last year.
That's cool.
3 full passes.
That's going to do it for our Finger Lakes Cable Access, Finger Lakes Television programming. We will be right back with more stories about the Mopar Missile and the Motown Missile and all of the great history with that car here in just about 30 seconds. Find us on fingerlakes1.tv or check out the Final Round Drag Racing Podcast on Facebook and YouTube. This has been the Final Round Drag Racing Podcast, coming to you live from the FingerLakes1.com studios in downtown Seneca Falls, New York. We'll see you right back here again in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching. Hopefully all that works, but we are back. It's the first time that I think that's the first time that we've ever gone in consciously knowing that we were going to go over time, so we had a little bit of a contingency plan in place.
I agree. I mean, yeah, in most cases, Joe, we just continue to talk and talk and talk. So yeah, that was the first time that we've actually done the soft ending like that. But yeah, the Donoff car too. If for anybody that well, a lot of people probably don't know it, but that car was actually in a movie as well. Do you remember that, Joe?
Yes, I do, and I'm trying to remember the name of the movie.
It was called Parenthood with Steve Martin.
We talked about that once. I remember.
Yeah. Yeah, basically the Steve Martin's daughter's boyfriend decides that he wants to be a drag racer, and then they go out to, I'm pretty sure they go out to Gainesville, and they show a couple of passes, and one of the passes that they show is the Mopar Missile going down the track. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Now, at that point,
that car is so well built. Ben used to run that car in what do they call it, Top Sportsman.
right.
And then they were running low 8-second passes at 175, 180 miles an hour. And all he had to do to update the car was add a couple of bars. That chassis is just as it was back in 1973.
Okay, now that's the Donhoff car, and we said that has the earlier paint scheme from 73, right?
That has
the late 72 paint scheme.
Late 72.
Just
this
like that.
should be
completed in October of 72, and they painted it. They did a quick paint job on it, and it had where it's now yellow on the side. It was more of a goldish tone. So yeah.
Yeah, that.
And of course, to make it a 73, you changed the front fenders and hood and grill and bumpers and the rear filler panel and tail lights, and it's a 73. So,
like I think this. Now, this picture is Stuart Pomeroy, and this is Don Carlton's name on the side.
Yep.
And there it is with the fenders being converted over to the 73.
Right.
And were
the fenders white?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That was at Teddy's shop. And we took it out, rolled it outside, took a bunch of pictures of
Pappas
it.
Oldfield photos on there.
Before we sent it out for paint. And I don't remember if we sent it down to Mancini's for paint or over to Tiganelli's. But it came back with a new paint scheme on it. And I think we had to do it anyhow because on the way back from Gainesville,
So this is the yellow.
a cabinet fell inside the truck and damaged the car on the, I forget if it was the roof or the side, and so it needed to be fixed anyhow. So good time to do that, right?
Sure, absolutely. Now that car was crashed at least once, right? When Ben had it.
Well, we crashed it once, but we didn't do much damage. We spun the car in Milan one time and backed it into the dirt out there at speed. That was pretty scary. But we were testing a flat crank motor, I believe, and the brakes locked up.
Oh.
And that's not a good thing, especially when the rear brakes lock up.
Yeah.
Yikes.
And then when Stuart Pomeroy owned the car, they rolled it once. It did a soft roll in the sand at, it was either Orlando or one of the local tracks down there.
Lakeland or something like that, Bradenton or...
It was one of the tracks near Tampa.
Yep.
And they did a soft roll, and they just bent up some of the sheet metal, but they fixed it in about 5 days, and you wouldn't have known that it ever went over. So
Wow.
It was a real soft roll, not much damage.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Chris had made mention of, it's somewhat related, but kind of unrelated. Chris had made mention about the Motown Missile. Now, the Motown Missile is a car that's owned by Mike Ricketts, and that car was the last...
Motown Missile, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the last car that Clyde Hodges built, is that right?
Yeah, it was the last customer car that Donnie and Clyde built together before Donnie passed away in 77. And it was a Volare, I guess, or Aspen, Dodge, the Aspen. And it was always meant to be a customer car.
Yep.
And the story that goes with that car is they sold it. The guy ran the car a couple of times, and then something happened, and he ran off the end of the track and did some minor damage to the car. But I think it scared the bejeebers out of him.
Yeah.
And he parked the car, and it stayed parked for forever. And Mike bought the car, in the early 2000s. And restored the car and got permission from Donnie's family to use the name or the paint scheme. And he called the car the Motown Missile. And Mike sold that car about 2 years ago. It's in a private collection somewhere in Illinois right now.
Yeah, I remember talking to Mike about...
Mike sold that car.
Yeah, I remember talking to Mike when he just
Mike had dinner or lunch with your uncle and I today. So.
Right, that's right, yep.
Mike Ricketts?
Mike Ricketts, yeah. Yeah. Mike's a really good guy. I remember we met him initially out in Minnesota when they had the Hemi reunion out there basically in the mid-2000s. Mm-hmm. And, Joe.
Was it Elkton?
Yeah, yep. What is his silver car? I know it's a Hemi, but what actually make and model is that?
It's a 64 Coronet. It's a WO car, and I must say that I lust for that car.
You and me both.
It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. It's a legal super stock car, and he's going to actually make some passes with it in a couple of weeks.
Oh, is he really?
Say it again.
I said I didn't realize he was going to do that. That's cool.
Yeah. He has that silver. It's a beautiful car. I mean, it's detailed to the max.
60 what?
And it's breathtaking to see it. He had it at Carlisle this year, and he also had it at the Mopar Nats, and it was parked next to Jimmy Addison's old silver Bullet car. So, and it got more attention than Jimmy Addison's old silver Bullet. So that's pretty special. Yeah.
I remember seeing that car at Elkton, and I was just absolutely blown away at how nice that car was there. Say Chris just put a picture up of it. That might actually, I don't know, if that might be from Elkton, actually, that picture that he's got up. But just a really, really cool car, super nicely done. Yeah, and Mike's just a really great guy. I like him a lot, and I remember talking to him about when he bought that Aspen, and he was thinking, it's like, geez, I'm thinking about maybe naming it the Motown Missile. It's like, what do you think? You think that's a cool name? I'm like, are you kidding? You couldn't pick a cooler name for that. And so yeah, that was cool. But yeah,
would you consider yourself biased?
Yeah, maybe a little, But yeah, I had forgot that he had sold that car.
Nostalgia Pro Stock for about 2 years.
Right.
And but the reason he sold it is, in all fairness, there's no Aspen parts available.
Sure.
If something were to happen, it would be impossible to find grill pieces and a quarter panel and all of the things that you need to put a car back together if you take a hit onto the wall or something. So he passed it on to a guy that has it in a beautiful collection, and it's safe and well cared for. And he and Mike have become very good friends, and so Mike replaced it with yet a nice Roadrunner, and
that was the first picture.
He was talking about building another Nostalgia Pro Stock car. So.
Oh, okay. I would say, speaking of Nostalgia Pro Stock, it makes me think. We mentioned his name earlier. Hemi Fred Rastegno. What happened to Fred's car? Fred passed away. Was it last year? Or was it earlier this year?
I believe it was a year ago.
Okay, so what happened to Fred's cars?
As best I know, the car is still in the estate.
Oh.
I haven't heard a peep from anyone about that. Whenever stuff goes into probate, it gets tied up for sometimes years.
Yep.
And then at some point, the family gets it and sells it.
Right.
So I honestly can't tell you what's going on with that.
Yeah. So just for Chris's knowledge, because he's not, I don't think he knows.
Smart, educated.
So, it's not it's not that you're not educated. You're just ignorant. That's all.
Perfect. Even better. Yeah, that's what I prefer.
So Hemi Fred bought. I don't know that he bought it from Sox and Martin, but it was an ex Sox and Martin. Was it a Duster?
It was a Pro Stock car. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it was one of Ronnie's Pro Stock cars.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They had a lot of cars, and they went through cars on a pretty regular basis. Remembering, that they built Ronnie's cars, and they had cars for Herb McCandless, and then they built a number of customer cars. From what I understand, they built over 50 customer cars.
Wow.
That I'm aware of.
Just focusing
there's a lot of cars out there.
Just focusing on the team's cars, I knew that they had several cars that they had out there. And that's why I was so surprised to hear that there was only 6
missiles.
Yeah, and all of them are accounted for at this point.
Yeah, the yellow test car, we believe, the stories that I've heard, after Don was back in North Carolina, it got converted back to a Hemi car. But because your uncle and I built the car so fragile, I must say, it was a rather fragile car. It didn't have the torsional rigidity to handle the massive amount of torque that the Hemi would provide, and the car was a little bit wiggly,
Right.
to say the least. And Don sold the car. It got raced in the Carolinas, and it got wrecked, I think, twice.
Ooh.
But the second time, it got totaled. And I think the car was parted out at that point. So
Wow.
that car, is gone. But 5 of the 6 cars are accounted for. We know
That's
where
so
the
cool.
Colt is. It lives in Virginia. It still belongs to the same people that Donnie sold it to in 1975. And
that was the car that Mr. Hoover found, right?
yep,
Just by chance.
It was somewhere near Roanoke, and
Oh, yeah, you told me about
the
this.
gentleman that has it, and he won't part with that car for any amount of money. So, because I've asked him.
Are the 5 in I mean, a couple of the stories, some of them were found in various states of repair, but they've been restored. So all of them at this point are in good condition?
All of them are, yeah.
That's so cool.
The Challenger and the Wire car, number 1 and number 6, are here, and they're both museum pieces.
They're with
the
you?
Barracuda is
Yeah.
in Jackson, Mississippi. The people that own it are they're kind of the whole process got slowed down. The car is about 95% complete. They need to get a motor and to do some final tweaking on some of the parts, but they've got everything they need, I believe.
This is the one you said you were saving to
So
buy?
it's okay. We know that the 73 Duster is in Florida with Ben Donhoff, and like I said, the Colt is in Virginia, and the one test car, the yellow test car, no longer exists. So everything's accounted for.
Wow. So that's pretty good percentage, pretty good survival rate.
Yeah. There's, I would say there's some interesting stories behind some of those cars. So yeah, I mean the '72 car that my uncle and I, so Mark Williamson, so that car ended up at Beatty and Woods, and my recollection of the story is that they had the car. Mark Williamson had a motor, I guess, a Hemi out at Beatty and Woods' shop. Beatty and Woods' shop burned down. The motor was destroyed, and they basically offered that car to Mark Williamson as a replacement for compensation for the motor that he'd lost. So he took that, parked it outside back of his house under a couple of tarps, and it sat there for the better part of 20 years.
Just sat there. That was the picture of the reddish-looking car under the tarp, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. It said isostatic rebound on it at the time.
Yeah.
That car was in really rough shape when Mark contacted my uncle and said, "Hey, come take a look at this." And we verified that it was the actual car, and it's since been restored. And like Joe said, it's down at I forget what the name of the place is down in Mississippi, but.
Well, it's now at Ebby Merritt's, but it had been at Paul's Auto
Right. Yeah.
or something like that in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
I think that's where it is, but I don't know where Ebby lives exactly.
I would say what happened to the restoration bankrupt Paul's?
I don't know, but Paul's is still in business. I think the restoration far exceeded what they expected to pay. All they would have had to do is ask me. I could have told them what it cost. And I think, talking to Ebby, my estimate back when they started was actually low. They spent that much money, and then they need to spend some more on the rest of the stuff, like the engine. So.
That's. I was just thinking in my head, how pure is one of these restorations? I mean, how much work do you have to go through? Is it even possible to secure like one of the motors that was actually in the car. I mean, so many of these things I would assume, there was only 5 of them to be found, but I would assume that the motors have been taken out when the shells are finally tracked down.
Yeah. What happens typically, almost unbelievably, the Challenger has one of Ted Spihar's original motors in it.
Does it really?
Wow.
It was motor number 34. And but most of our race motors basically got used up over the years. Mm-hmm. So they no longer exist. Mm-hmm. People are always saying, well, I have a Don Carlton motor. Well, yeah, they might. I don't have a way to verify a Carlton motor. Sure. I assume that Donnie had kept records, and maybe his son Don still has those records. And there was probably identifying numbers that they would stamp into the blocks, at least. But for the most part, motors, you'll never find an original motor. On the other hand, you can, if you can get the parts, you can build motors that would be proper, period correct, that would use the proper technology. The hard thing is some of the unique parts that we had on our motors, like our original crank trigger ignitions were all handmade. Later, now everybody can buy one for any motor you want, but back in those days we had to machine all the parts ourselves. Wow. and so those kinds of things you'd have to duplicate from pictures. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that was the big challenge on the wire car when when Arnie had it restored. All our A engines, those 3 small block motors, were gone. Every one of them. There weren't any in existence. The only pro stock motor that we could find was a Glidden motor that he had run in the Arrow. What was that, about 89 when he ran that Arrow? Mm-hmm. And
79.
So that's what's actually in the wire car now. It looks like a motor that we would have used. Yeah. It's period correct. The oil pump is different because we couldn't find and locate an original style pump that we would have used, but everything sits in the same place and runs the same way, and unless you really knew what you were looking at, you'd never know. But at some point you just have to say, hey, stuff isn't available and I got to go with what I got. So
Arrow being a Plymouth Arrow?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is the second Plymouth Arrow reference.
Yes, this is the second. Yes, absolutely. So, Eric McElroy, if you're watching, we were talking about your car a few weeks ago. We couldn't come up with Plymouth Arrow for whatever reason. We were all drawing a blank, but yes, Glidden ran the Plymouth Arrow in late 70s, 78, 79, right in that era.
By
80.
By late.
Car is not far from where you guys are.
What?
What is it?
That Plymouth Arrow exists somewhere in your neck of the woods over there.
Wait a second.
Really?
Yep, I know the guy that owns it. And he bought all of Glidden's Mopar stuff.
Really? It sounds like we have a future guest in store for the show.
Yeah, I'll hook you up with him. He's a really great guy. And, he's started the restoration of the Arrow.
Oh, no
That's
kidding.
So cool.
That is very cool.
So, by 89, right, Glidden was in the motorcraft car by then, wasn't he?
This is a Bob Glidden car. They aren't. They're clones.
Yeah. No. So, Joe said 89, but he's old, and the decades pass very quickly. Joe meant 79, so it was 79 or 80 when Glidden was running the Arrow. By the late 80s, Glidden was in... by the late 80s, Glidden was into the Thunderbirds and stuff like that.
Yeah. We called them Thunder Chickens, of course.
Right. Those for old guys like Joe, those decades just blend together,
Yeah, well, there's been a lot of those go under my belt here.
I'm dying to know more about
cars in your neck of the woods, so that's a good guide for you to get on your show sometime.
In 2 weeks. He's got 2 weeks.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to. I'll definitely have to get that information from you.
Much more than that.
All right. Now another guy that another guy that you guys had a real close relationship with was Arlen Vanke, and there's some ties here to Western New York with Arlen too, just because Mike Gunther and Mr. Miller bought one of Vanke's cars and raced it in super stock out here, basically based out of Western New York. So, I mean, you kept in touch. You guys were good friends with Arlen for many, many years, kept in touch up until he passed away again. It was just a few months ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Arlen had, going back to about 2008, I think, Jason, you were there. We all went to that show in Buffalo. Was it the Gear Grinders or something like that?
The Clutch Artist
in Buffalo.
Yep.
And Arlen was there, and Judy Lilly was there, and
right.
McCandless, and then we all went out to dinner that evening. It was the day that Scott Coletta was killed.
Mm. Oh, was it really? Was that the same day?
Yep.
Wow.
But Arlen had already had a couple of mini strokes by that point.
Yeah.
And he was doing pretty well, though. He was very mobile, and there was some minor things that you could pick up on if you knew him from the old days. But he already had a couple of strokes, and he would go to Henderson, and he went for a couple years down there, but I believe it was about maybe about 12, 13, that he had a series of severe strokes.
Yep.
And he had been in a convalescent rehab center in Deming, New Mexico ever since.
Yep.
And as your uncle and I would travel back and forth for various reasons to go pick up cars or something in California, we would normally stop and visit with him and call him when we weren't in town, just to say hi and let him know that we're thinking of him. And we were fortunate enough to see him a year ago in May when we brought the Challenger back from California. And he signed the license plate of the Challenger. And a lot of people don't know that it was Arlen Vanke that came up with the name Motown Missile. They were all at a test at Detroit Dragway back in 1970, and the missile car was just painted black. It just, they needed to put paint on it, so they painted it black. And Arlen said, that thing goes like a missile. You should call it the Motown Missile. And the name stuck. And that's how the car got its name. So Arlen was a wonderful guy to be around, and miss him dearly.
Yeah, he had some great stories. It's just I'm really glad that I had the opportunity. I mean, I didn't meet him obviously until he was well out of racing, but I'm really glad I had the opportunity to not only meet him but spend quite a bit of time with him. Actually, I know he was at Elkton. We saw him multiple times, like I said, down in Henderson. He was out here in Buffalo, and there's a great picture I wasn't there, but a great picture of the one year at Indy. I don't know if you were there when they had his car there commemorating, I don't know if it was the 50th anniversary of his win and Pro Stock or something like that.
He had a stroke by that time, and he couldn't use the clutch.
Yeah.
So your uncle drove the car.
Yeah.
And Arlen rode shotgun.
Yep.
Yeah. That was cool.
Did they launch?
Definitely. What was that?
They launched that thing hard when they took
off?
No.
They just made a parade lap down the track. But how cool is that, right?
Still,
so here you are at the U.S. Nationals. Okay, we're going to stop the program right in the middle, and now we're going to do this special presentation where we're going to bring the car up and it's going to make a parade lap down the track in front of everybody. That's pretty freaking cool.
Yes, very.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that it's already too late. I'm probably haven't accomplished enough in my drag racing career at this point in time. And even if I were to go on a massive winning streak, I probably would never be honored with the same type of thing that he had done with him. So yeah, that's pretty darn incredible.
You can make a pass down my road any day.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. Yeah, so just a great guy, and he's
you could take a pass down his road, nice parade lap in your Malibu Missile.
Right, yeah, it's a Malibu Missile. Yeah, it's painted gold. I just need to add some black lettering to it, and we'd be pretty close.
Dan the sign man can hook you up.
Jason, I helped your uncle back half that car when we were working at a Greenwood shop with Ron Fournier.
Yep.
Did you know that?
I think I heard stories. So now we've actually switched. Chris. Now we're talking about the Corvette.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So was that
your Corvette?
My Corvette. Yes. Okay. So was that in the 80s when you did that? Was that the back half in the 80s, or was that the early back half in the 70s when that was done?
It's the one in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I was still, I believe, I was still in school. It had to be 75 or early 76 that we did that.
Yeah, I can't.
We were working for Ron Fournier. I was having a part-time job and going to school, and Ronnie put me to work. So, that's what we did.
I would have said it was earlier.
Your car was there. Muldowney's one of her cars was there.
Yeah.
And we were in the process of building a IMSA car for. I think Sam Posey drove it. It was a Chevy Monza for IMSA.
Yeah.
We built that car. It was a Bob Riley design. Pretty cool piece.
So
we did a lot of different stuff.
Did you catch that, Chris?
There's
Corvette,
a lot of big names that just got thrown around there.
My Corvette was being worked on right next to Shirley Muldowney's car.
Yep, I heard that part. It's not. I feel like your car. Well, it was your dad's car at that point.
Right. Yeah. It's still my dad's car. I'm just the caretaker.
Right. Curator. The car, however, I feel like wasn't maybe the primary focus if Muldowney's car was parked next to it?
Oh, I'm pretty sure.
No. Actually, Ron did all the work on Muldowney's car because it needed some tin work done on the body.
What did she have?
Ron was the master body guy. He could make anything out of aluminum or steel when it came to compound metal shaping. And that's what it took. I don't know who originally built the body, but it was there for a short period of time.
Now, was that at that point in time? Was it was a dragster, right? That wasn't. Yeah,
it was one of her dragsters.
Yeah,
okay.
It would have been a rear-engine car.
Yeah.
So, it was because they were literally everything was a rear-engine car at that time.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, and this name comes up and just kind of by chance, but Ron Fournier, master craftsman, passed away last week.
He passed away Sunday morning. It's kind of odd. A week ago today, I spent 3 hours with him.
Oh, really?
I would typically go see your uncle.
Yep.
They're way on the other side of town. They're about 70 miles from where we live. And I go see your uncle and visit with him, take him to lunch, and then I usually go see Ron. But I got out of sync with that for last week. Another mutual friend wanted to visit with Ron. And so we went and visited with Ron, and I stayed with him until his niece came to pick him up for a doctor appointment. And that night he had another massive stroke.
Oh.
And the family called me on Friday. I was at my grandson's football game, and Lynn and I tore away from the game and went to the hospital and stayed with him half the night into early the next morning. And he passed away Sunday morning about 4:30, I guess.
Yeah.
And Yeah, it's sad. I mean, the world's lost one of the true craftsmen. He and anybody who does the compound metal work or any kind of metal shaping would know who Ron Fournier is. He built a company that did all that kind of work, plus developed tools for the craftsmen. Anything from English wheels to power hammers to whatever, and they sold that stuff. And he passed on the knowledge to a great number of people, and that's his legacy. It's a pretty cool legacy when you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say,
in the business now that are because of him.
Right. I mean, I never met Ron, though. I have to say, I mean, all I heard was stories about how ridiculously talented he was. And what a fantastic craftsman. And my dad, again, I remember being a kid sitting there and my dad telling me stories about Ron working on the English wheel, and it's like, going back and forth, and it's like, next thing you know, it's like, there's a fender for a 38 Ford or something like that, right? And it's like it started off as a flat piece of aluminum just 20 minutes beforehand. Yeah, he said it was...
Ron had quite a career, and I'll just give you a brief history of his career. Ron and I have been friends since 1970, about the same time I met your uncle.
Okay.
And he had a shop in Royal Oak, but back in the 60s, he was a high school kid. Ron was 75, so he's only 6 years older than myself.
Yeah.
And he got a job as a fabricator at Holman Moody. His first day there was also the first day of another kid they hired to sweep floors, whose name was Cale Yarborough.
Really?
Yeah. Ron was the fabricator and Cale was the floor sweeper.
Wow.
They were long friends as well.
Yeah.
Wow. And but Ron went from there to A.J. Foyt. And he worked for A.J. Oh, I take that back. He went from there to work for Roger Penske. Back when Penske was maybe 8 people. That was the Penske organization. And his best friend became Mark Donahue. And whenever I go see Ron, he'd be wearing his Mark Donahue hat. He truly was enamored with his. He had a great relationship with Mark, and Roger Penske was very good to Ron, and to this day just thought the world of Ron. But he worked for Penske. And all those famous Trans Am Camaros that people saw, the Can-Am cars that you saw, the Indy cars that you saw, Ron fabricated those cars. And Ron was meticulous with the camera as well. And he documented everything he ever did. And he had archives of photos of things that he had done going back to those days. And after his time at Penske, he worked for A.J. Foyt, and he then came back to Michigan and started a company called Racecraft. And that's where I met Ron in about 1970. And he was in the process of building Wally Booth's Gremlin and Rich Maskin and Jim Gilbert's Gremlin. Those 2 cars were under construction when I first met him. And we became fast friends and have stayed friends until he passed on Sunday. But he started Racecraft. He had a number of projects over the years, from IndyCar tubs for George McNaughty to Trans Am cars for Bob Riley, to street cars. He did projects for Gratiot Auto Supply. He did all kinds of things. And then he took a stint working for Robert Cumberford. out in Connecticut, which didn't last long because that company went belly up, and he ended up working at Bob Sharp Racing. And that's when Paul Newman was driving those Nissan cars that were pretty cool. And there was great stories involved with that. And then he came back to Michigan and started Fournier Enterprises, and that's where real success, financially at least, came to Ron. And he wrote a couple of books on metalworking, did a lot of videos, sometimes alone, sometimes in conjunction with his friend Ron Cavell, who's also a master metal crafter. And then he started having strokes about 1.5 years or 2 years ago, and medically he turned into a mere shadow of himself. But he was still Ron. He's had a great sense of humor, and we had lots of fun. And it's hard to see him gone now.
No, I can believe it. And honestly, Joe, I didn't realize that you were that close with Ron. I didn't realize. Again, he's a name from my past and stories that I heard, and I know somewhere at home I have Ron's book, which I think, if I remember correctly, when that came out, I don't know if my dad bought it or if Ron gave him a copy, but I'm fairly certain it's autographed by Ron as well. But I didn't realize that you kept in touch with him and that you knew him that well.
Ron and I worked together, or I worked for him or together with him 3 different times in my career. Once at Racecraft, when he owned that, and later at SVI, which was Ted Spihar's company that Ted was already gone from, and Mike Coran owned it, and that was in the 80s. And then later, in the later 80s, we worked together at a company called Engineering Technology together. And but we always stayed friends. We did all kinds of things together. We would buy season tickets to go to the theater, and we would go out to dinner and make a whole evening of it, 6 or 8 times a year. And birthdays and weddings, and his daughter's the same age as my daughter, and so things just it was kind of a family type thing.
Right.
Yeah, it's sad to see him gone, and the world's lost a great craftsman, but he's trained so many people, so the legacy lives on, which is the greatest thing.
Yep.
He loved to teach the skills, and he did. And his son works at Legendary Motor Car outside of Toronto. You see, if you ever watch that show on television, you'll see Dan doing the fab work there.
Oh, no kidding.
And that's his son. And he's trained literally, I would say, a good 1,000 people over the years in those metal shaping skills, and it's a wonderful thing. It's cool stuff to see it happen. So,
does the teacher ever give away all the secrets?
I got a chance to know him.
That's a good question. Chris just wanted to know, does the teacher ever give away all the secrets? Knowing Ron, the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Ron didn't ever hold back.
That's cool.
Because, in all honesty, everyone develops their own style of work.
True.
But the basic skills have to be learned. How metal moves, what makes it move, and the tools that will help you to do that. So Ron was probably the most open person I've ever known. Mm-hmm. He literally would run seminars twice a month. For years he did this. And he'd have 6 or 8 students because he only had, I think, six or 8 English wheels. He would teach, and it would be a 3 or 4 day seminar. and then people could come back for advanced classes as well. It was really cool to see that happen. And there are people now that owe their current livelihoods to what they learned in that class.
Now that you mention it, Joe, I think that's maybe where my dad got Ron's book. Now that you mention it, it kind of jogged my memory. I think my dad went to one of those seminars.
Well, he might have.
And you know what? I will say that he certainly didn't learn a lot at it, but he certainly, I believe he did go to one.
What year did, I hate to ask this, but what year did John pass?
91.
I think Ron's book came out before that, so it's very possible he went.
Yeah, it was definitely before that, and like I said, now that you mentioned it, you mentioned that seminar, I'm like, I think my dad went to Detroit and went to one of those seminars.
It's very possible. Ron started doing those in the late 80s.
Okay.
And because we worked together 86 and 87 at NTEC, and that's the last place we worked together at.
Yeah.
He was doing that kind of work, and he was writing that book. And I know that we were at NTEC. We had cases of those books around, and people would come and he'd sign them, and
right.
It was a great time.
Now you mentioned all the photographs. Is it at all possible that all those ended up scanned and online someplace for people to view?
I don't think so. I know that Ron saved them and was using them when he wrote a book.
Yeah.
All the photos literally in his books would be from his personal archives.
Yep.
Wow.
And I believe his archives are in the hand now of his daughter, Nicole.
Yeah.
And his son, Dan, and then their cousin, Jeff, who now runs Fournier Enterprises. It's now located in Mount Clemens, and Jeff is a young guy. Of course, everybody looks young to me, but Jeff is a young guy. And he runs classes about once a month or once every other month, and just like Ron did. And he's a lot like Ron's son, Dan. They're both just fantastic craftsmen.
Wow.
It's fun to watch them work.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I guess I can only hope as let's call it a fan of all the old race cars and stuff like that at some point in time some of those archives end up online for everybody to enjoy.
Oh yeah. Now, like in my case, I've got a couple gigs of photos that were mine and your uncle's,
right,
and other photos that Stuart Pomeroy accumulated.
Right. And
Stuart and I had talked about a website, putting them up there for people just to use. I mean, the problem is it takes a lot of time and effort to do that, and I just haven't had the time. I seem to be a lot more busy now that I'm retired than I was when I actually worked for a living.
Well, I would say between buying the house, which have you been in the house a year yet?
Actually, 2 years we've been in the house.
Wow, time flies.
We've owned it almost 3, and I spent 1 year working on the home.
Right.
And then after we moved 2 years ago, I did what I needed to do to make the barn my shop. And so I've got heat and insulation and my equipment out there, and I take care of both those missile cars, plus the hauler, plus all my own stuff.
Right.
And as you know, I'm building a truck right now for myself, so that's a big project. And
yeah, you and I have talked. I mean, you've owned the parts for that truck for quite a while, or at least let's call it the base, right?
Yeah, I have. I've owned it probably about 8 years, 9 years. But I hadn't maybe it's been 10 years. But at any rate, I own the parts. But now it's coming together. I've got a rolling chassis.
Yep.
It's tacked together, not fully welded yet, because I keep changing my mind on things. But it's a 49 Dodge B1B pickup truck. I think it's a 108-inch wheelbase vehicle with C4 Corvette suspension front and rear and coilovers. It has a slight rake to it, but I'm still working on the chassis. So I got a lot of work to do. This winter I'll do all the final welding on the chassis, but as you can imagine, there's a lot to do.
Do we think that it'll be unveiled in 2018 maybe?
No.
Not even a thought on it. That's funny.
I'm still trying to figure out how to afford a paint job on it. I can do everything else, but I don't paint. So that'll be the tough one.
I say you just got to go with the trend of the 2010 decade, I guess, and just primer it flat black and be done with it.
Or
no, it's got to be shiny. I can't.
Just clear coat it.
I'm a traditionalist.
Just clear coat what's there. Whatever it looks like. Clear coat over all the bare metal and everything. Just let that patina look show through.
Yeah, well. Dan Delaney working on a paint scheme for me. It's got to have styling cues from all the missile cars, I told him.
Mm-hmm.
That would be cool.
It's predominantly going to be black.
Can't go wrong.
And we'll have some gold leaf, we'll have some orange, we'll have some yellow in it.
Well, look forward to seeing that for sure. I mean, thankfully, I'm friends with you on Facebook, so I get to see the pictures updated on Facebook when you make progress. So we'll be watching.
Yeah. That's the fun part, sharing the pictures, and it'll be cool when it's done. We'll make it really creature comfort. The only thing my wife says, it's got to have a cup holder.
I think you can probably accommodate her.
I think so. I'll do my best.
Well, I would say we've been on the phone. Like I said, I asked you for an hour. You gave me at least an hour and 52 minutes at this point in time. I guess, Chris, is there anything else that you wanted to ask?
Just the last question, and I bet you it'll take us right up to the top of the hour, is, at this point, to you, with all the memorials and the storied drivers and the fact that you've got all 5 cars still accounted for and in good states of repair, what's the enduring legacy of the missile story?
Oh, well, the enduring legacy, I think, is fairly straightforward. You got to remember what our purpose was. Our purpose wasn't to race. It was to be an engineering program to share data with all the Chrysler racers, mm-hmm. and to develop parts that Chrysler could sell. Mm-hmm. So I think our legacy boils down really to the engineering aspect of it, because what we were, in essence, is a large, highly organized design of experiments. We became data gatherers. Our job was to share that with all the other racers. And sure, we could use the data ourselves, and we did successfully, but our job was to share it. And it was the first time in the history of drag racing that they actually used pure science to make a car go faster. And it sounds simple, but no one had done it.
Right.
Most of the drag racing was, you might try a new part here and a part there, but most people didn't have data like we did to back it up. So the passion that I still hold, and what made me want to go back and get my degree and become an engineer, is it was a science project. that was really cool. It was the coolest science project that you could think of. And, I liken it to this TV commercial that's running currently where these kids, these youngsters are all doing their little science projects for the science fair, and this one pours some from a vial into a volcano and it erupts, and somebody else does something, and the last kid puts on his goggles, presses a button, and starts a top fuel engine that's on a test stand. That's science.
Right. Yep.
So that's what we did. That's the legacy, I think.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about it all. I mean, a lot of the experimentation and testing that you did is all on the Mopar Hamtramck website, right? I mean, those were all pictures that you and my uncle took that Stuart then scanned and put online. So you can just see a whole bunch of stuff, experiments that you guys ran, whether they were hood scoop tests or wind tunnel tests or actual on-track testing. The whole data recorder, I mean, you guys, I'm pretty sure, have the first documented data recorder that was used, I will say, in drag racing. I don't know if it was auto racing in particular, but certainly in drag racing. And, I definitely remember, my uncle telling me that, if that data recorder wasn't working, then we weren't making passes because we couldn't basically take data at that point in time. We weren't going to do anything where we couldn't scientifically experiment. And it was even just in the processes that you used that, everything was done with an ABA test mechanism. So we have our baseline, we make a change, one change, not a million changes. We make one change. That's our B pass. Then we go back to our A pass to verify that what we actually changed made a difference. So it was even the scientific method that was used that you guys did is really, I think, unprecedented for the most part. Now, again, today it's different, but the stuff that you guys did back then was really, really incredible. And like I said, we really didn't spend a lot of time talking. We didn't spend any time talking about any of that stuff, but it's...
Yeah, I understand. The mechanism was pretty simple. We were basically... we would travel with a van full of electronic gear. The car would be fully instrumented. We'd run our test program. We do all the weather corrections based on George Wallace's correction factors that he created when he was at Chrysler. And all that stuff still exists. Those books all still exist. All those run charts still exist. And they're it's like finding the Dead Sea Scrolls in a way, I guess. Because that's pure science. Is the way we approached everything, and we would make as many as 50 passes a week on that car. And if you remember, a Hemi's only good for maybe 10 runs before you have to change the bearings. So there'd be a lot of bearing or engine changes. And then you had to reset a new baseline, of course, because you had made a change, either a new bullet and a new engine, or you had new bearings and so on and so forth. So it was a lot of work, but it was good work, and it was fulfilling, I must say.
And they paid you.
Amazing.
Yeah,
my
it
mom
really
never quite got her arms around that. It took her many years to figure out that I had a real job.
Right.
But when she did, she stopped, bugging me about it. The old, mothers are always that way. When
right.
are you going to get a real job, Joe? I have one.
Yeah, look, Mom, here's my paycheck. They actually pay me to do this.
Well, you know what it took, Jason, is she was watching Wide World of Sports with me on a Saturday. And if you remember, every once in a while, maybe twice a year, they'd show drag racing.
Right.
And she's watching the drag racing, and she saw me on TV. And she said, "Is that what you do?" And I said, "Yeah, that's part of it." And she said, "Well, you really do have a job, don't you?" Notice that another word.
We got to find some of those archives. That'd be pretty.
Yeah.
I have to say that'd be pretty cool to see wide world of sports coverage.
You think YouTube doesn't like it when we have music playing in the background? Wait till we start putting Diamond P programming on the podcast.
Yeah. We gotta find that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I mean,
Yep. Pretty cool stuff.
very. This whole episode has been, to simplify it, cool stuff. I mean, the conversation that we've had, we greatly appreciate you coming on and giving us 2 hours of your time just to talk about all of the topics that we've hit on. I mean, you can't condense it down any more than what we did, because there's so much stuff that we haven't even hit on.
Oh yeah.
And we just glanced over it. We put together the preface for the next 2 or 3 appearances, right?
That's right.
We do need more information on where Glidden's arrow is, though.
Where what is?
Where Glidden's arrow is.
Oh.
Yeah, we'll get that stuff from you. Joe, I thank you so much for coming on and hanging out with us for a little while, making episode 23 a special one.
Well, you're more than welcome. I had a good time, and I'll do it again if you want me someday.
Yes. Free up your schedule for every other Thursday from now through the end of the year. Again, man, appreciate you coming on, and we'll be talking soon, Joe.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye.
There goes Joe Pappas, former crewman on the Motown Missile. Timed that perfect. Phone just died.
Wow, nice. That was you definitely timed that perfect. That's
Meant to be. It's meant to be. Every now and again, we have an episode like that. That is going to do it for episode number 23 with Joe Pappas. Appreciate him coming on. We're going to be back again in 2 weeks. That's going to do it for us from the North Park building here at Academy Square. We'll see y'all next time. This has been the Final Round Drag Racing Podcast, coming to you live from the FingerLakes1.com studios in downtown Seneca Falls, New York. We'll see you right back here again in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching.